Alright guys, so it should be no surprise to anyone that Ash's ace Pokemon are basically what nearly everyone in the audience believes to be his strongest Pokemon. And I'm just gonna get right to the point. No one's gonna care about my subjective opinion on their writing quality, and recently I've kind of been interested in the scaling side of the anime. So today I thought I ought to rank all of Ash's aces weakest to strongest. And to be on the safer side towards the audience, I devised two different tier lists. The first is going to be an objective ranking, where without bias, I rank each of them purely based on what we're giving in the show. For example, usually a lot of people would entertain the idea that a hypothetical Journey's Infernape is easily champion level just because he's been training for 4 series. But if he canonically did not beat any champion level Pokemon, he's kinda cooked. The second list is going to be more of a subjective ranking that'll be a much more opinionated. So for example, even though Crocodile objectively stands no chance against Greninja, if you have a perfectly viable reason to want to put him over Greninja, go right ahead. Hey, so Gemstone in the future, by the way, just because I've been taking forever to get progress for this video, I asked whether I should combine both tier lists into one or split them into 2 separate videos. As you probably noticed, the latter option won, and so I'll be doing an objective tier list first and then have the subjective tier list done afterwards. Other than that, enjoy the rest of the video. But there really shouldn't be any point in dragging this on any further, so without stalling any longer, let's get started. And then to start off the objective ranking, we're gonna have the D tier. This is gonna be for Pokemon that are generally around league level. I should note that Pokemon that are gonna be a tier apart doesn't mean that there's gonna be a massive gap. There is a chance a D tier Pokemon can score off with a C tier Pokemon if you highball them to the maximum, but somewhat lowballing them to their average capability was the safer approach in my opinion. And the first and only Pokemon that we're gonna have in this tier is Crocodile, who barely has any feats. Beating Iris's Dragonite and Stefan's Sawk is something cool within its own series, but it just doesn't compare to anything the other aces have done. Arguably could be in the same tier as Charizard as well, just for their relativity in low diffing Iris's Dragonite, but with such vague chain scaling and a lack of direct feats slash wins, he still suffers greatly to properly contend with the rest. And then getting on to the C tier, the Pokemon in this tier are all going to be who I believe are a solid Elite 4 level. And the first Pokemon that we're going to have here is Septile. The reason is he has simple Elite 4 level feats. The main example would be beating Spencer's Pokemon in the Battlefront tier, who are stated to be Elite 4 level. With Tobias in his Darkrai, this is honestly something that's going to need a whole nother video to break down, but the general estimation is that he is around Elite 4 level. And probably the last and only other thing people would like to mention with Septile would be catching, or even beating up, depending on who you talk to, a speed form Deoxys. However, this feat is often overrated and misunderstood because this is actually a non-combative feat. The main purpose of this encounter was to leave an opening for Deoxys to be captured, and when fought head-on, Ash, along with his friends who aren't too far behind him in strength, stood no chance. And I should even also note that one of Ash's fastest and strongest Pokemon at the time got no diffs. It was only until Deoxys was literally stated to have been weakened by the meteorite that Septile had the opportunity to catch up and force it back to its regular form. I know, kinda seemed a little sidetracked there, but I really wanted to clear up that feat because a lot of people bring it up even though it doesn't actually help him. But getting to the rest of the C tier, we're going to have 2 Pokemon and they're both going to be interchangeable. And that is going to be Charizard slash Infernape. To start with Charizard first, he has Elite 4 level feats as well via Nolan's Articuno. He was also brought to Ash's final match against Brandon, and even though he barely did anything, the fact that he was considered to be one of Ash's best chances against him says enough. And with Infernape, normally just looking at DP, he would be in the D tier just because his best accomplishments in that series is beating a high league level Paul, which is unfortunately below what Septile and Charizard could do in the previous series. However, with Journeys, Infernape fought Charizard off screen. A lot of Charizard fans don't like the opinion that Infernape won, even though Infernape went to look for even stronger opponents to better boost him up not long after. But to not trigger either side, let's just say that this off-screen battle at bare minimum proves that Infernape and Charizard are vaguely relative with one another. Whether Infernape barely won, barely lost, or even maybe a draw, I'll leave the results to you, which is why they're interchangeable here. And then getting on to the B tier, this tier is going to be a little tricky, but I claim this tier to be the lower end of champion tier. And the first Pokemon that we're going to have is Greninja. Probably one of the hardest to precisely estimate. The best we can work with is that during XY he can contend with Alliance Charizard, who at the bare minimum can beat the Elite Four Malva, but at the very highest he can bag Diantha into a corner. A lot of people say that Diantha was holding back during their encounter, but there is an instance where Diana monologues to herself that if she didn't block a certain attack from an imperfect Ash Greninja, she would have been cooked. There's also the fact that she had to Mega Evolve just to keep up with Ash Greninja, but the best thing to say that Diantha held back is the fact that she only used Shadow Ball, even though Gardevoir canonically knows other offensive moves like Moonblast. Basically, in short, Greninja with the full potential of Battle Bond can fight on a champion level to some extent, but if said champion were to pull out all the stops, like Diantha using all of her moves, more than likely they'd be able to win. The last notable thing too with Greninja is in Journeys when he fights Lucario, and this is also simply misunderstood along with the Diantha battle. For example, a major piece of context surrounding this is that Lucario was just not in the right headspace, as he was blatantly disturbed before the battle, couldn't even react to Ash's command when given ahead of time, and couldn't properly sync with Ash to Mega Evolve. I think if you try to outright say that Greninja won both of those battles, it's pretty makey because you would be ignoring the context for why Greninja was able to do what he did. And even though he technically never won against any real champion level Pokemon, Greninja is much closer to being able to do so compared to the aces below him. And then getting on to the next Pokemon, we're going to have Lychenrock, one of the arguable aces of Alola's team, which is Ash's canonical champion team. He didn't get any wins against Kukui, which is the strongest other trainer in Alola, but arguably that was just due to underperforming compared to what they can do with the best of their ability. The reason for us saying this is that he was able to fight Kukui's Incinor prior and won a brief clash against them, forcing the latter to switch afterwards. It should be noted that I'm bringing up Kukui like this is because he can be considered champion level, even if on the lower end of it, as he's basically like the champion battle equivalent in the Sun and Moon games. Plus, very blatantly, he can fight on par with, again, a literal champion Ash, who is easily between his XY and Journey selves in power. And the next Pokemon is also going to be another Pokemon from Alola, and that's going to be Incinor. I was struggling to figure out which of the two I should add to the list, as a lot of people usually go back and forth with who is the real ace of Alola that's not Pikachu, but to make both sides happy, I thought I ought to just add both of them. And actually, this is going to be an easy follow-up to Lychenrock because, as I said, he is one of the arguable aces of the Alola champion team. Unlike Lychenrock though, he did manage to get 2 wins against Kukui's Pokemon, which included the latter's ace, Incineroar. Regardless of who you think is the narrative regional ace of Alola, one thing that's true for sure is that feat-wise, Incineroar is definitely the stronger of the two. And then moving on, we're going to have the A tier, and this tier in my opinion is what I'd say is the comfortable space within champion tier. And the only other Pokemon that I'm gonna have in this tier is gonna be Lucario. This is gonna be the easiest to rank solely for the fact that he has several champion level feats. He starts off on the lower end by beating Raihan, but eventually he does go on to beat 2 Pokemon of the second strongest champion in the verse back to back, including her ace by the way. They also managed to beat one of Leon's Pokemon, for which any and all of them can give even one of the strongest Pokemon in the Masters 8 a run for the money just by themselves. But moving on to the S tier, this one doesn't really have a particular level, just something I wanted to reserve just for the number 1 spot, but the only Pokemon that we're going to have in this tier is obviously going to be Pikachu. This is going to be the easiest to rank alongside Lucario, but just has way better reasons. Just looking at only Pokemon journeys, Pikachu is able to beat 2 of each the 3rd, 2nd, and strongest champions of the verse, which includes the aces of 2 of those 3 strongest. But overall, that is going to be the objective ranking. Alrighty, Gemstone in the future again. I know that the ending kinda seemed a little abrupt, but again, this was combined into one whole video, pretty much just seemingly moving on to the next tier list. But I guess this can suffice as a statistical information kind of video. But if you want slightly more in-depth descriptions of these aces, stay tuned for the objective ranking in the next video. And hopefully, y'all have a good one, but that's pretty much all I got for now. Yep.
Do it now!